Dėkoju instruktam ir dėkoju Lietuvos architektų sąjunga. Labai atsiprašau, bet mano lietuviškai labai blogai. So reikia šitą prezentaciją in angliškai. We started this project actually in 2016. This is when we were first approached by Vilnius International School, the director Rebecca Juris and her husband Vygandas Juris. And they wanted to turn this old confectionery factory into a school, into a high school for their grades 10 through 12. Dana was the project leader and I was the architect on this project. We worked through Senojo, miesto, architektai, which we've been doing since 2005. There had been historic research done previously in 1991. The factory was still in operation, although at the tail end of its operation. And so we reviewed as much of that information as we could to see what we could get from it. It was very thorough, I mean, as thorough as it could be at the time. You can see it just simply divided it, not so much by years, but just by styles. And then after the factory moved out percolated to a new location, the building began to fall very much into ruin. It was already in fairly bad shape, but now it began to deteriorate rapidly. For 26 years, it sat there on the corner, basically like a dead building. But it is within the historic quarter, within the UNESCO World Heritage Site, and considered an integral part of it. It didn't have any unique number as of yet, but its fabric was considered to be important and needed to be thoroughly researched. And so in 2017, we initiated additional architectural research, archaeological research, historic research, geological research to try to understand this building in more depth, particularly its low water table. This building was only 2.5 meters above water underneath. It was very close to the river. So you can see we had much more detailed historic, architectural research done at this time. We could very much see that this building was cobbled together over many years, roughly 200 years of additions to the building. And it's very hard to see what is original and what is not original because, of course, it's been parged over with plaster. So through the research, we were sort of able to divide its chronology, how it began. Actually, this building dated all the way back to the late 18th century. There was a one-story building on Rusugatve, which was part of the old merchants and craftsmen's area in the Ruthenian quarter of the city. And then it began to slowly be added on to. It became basically a crafts district, and merchants, merchants operating in it as well. 1840, the buildings were ceded over to the Orthodox Church, which at that point began to rent out the spaces to, merchants and craftsmen. It continued to grow throughout the 19th and the early 20th century when it was made into a chocolate factory, Fortuna chocolate factory. And then the major renovation took place in the mid part of the 20th century during the Soviet era when Pergolay took over the building and added on what you see as those yellow parts. Part of that was using a combination of historic walls and new walls. And finally, our conversion of the building in 2019, 2020 to what it is today. Initial archaeological investigations revealed basically a whole little community underneath the building. We found all these wooden foundations and stone paving that dated back to the 17th century. And so it was just small little pocket archaeological digs done at the time, and then we knew we would have to do much thorough archaeological investigation once construction began. But at least gave us some idea what we were dealing with, and also helped us to locate the water table of the building. Initial conception, we went through several schemes, but finally we decided upon enclosing the whole building, turning it into a tech incubator. The idea was to sort of make something that wasn't look like a high school, something that would sort of spur high school students to feel they were more part of a tech environment, especially given all their reliance on cell phones and everything else. That we thought this would be a more exciting environment for them. And so part of that concept involved turning the courtyard into an atrium, because that atrium we felt would be the sort of like the congregation hall, the meeting area, where they could put on plays, put on any kind of functions that they wanted to do, or just generally meet and discuss. The school itself had a very liberal style of teaching, kind of modeled after the Finnish system. They didn't really have like divisions. The idea was to bring students and teachers together on a constant basis, make it more informal setting. Of course, part of the problem that we encountered with this, as soon as we closed the courtyard, it became part of the square meters of the building. And so Cultural Heritage Department told us that we had to shave away from the building because we had no more than 80% of a footprint that we could use. So that meant that we had to sort of cut in on the walls. What we basically did is we eliminated the Soviet addition. The Soviet addition was very hard to work with. It was not considered valuable, so we eliminated this portion of the building. And in its place, we built a new construction, which was a new sports hall and art studios in its place. And as a result, you can see with a red dotted line here, this was the original footprint. We had to shave in along the walls here and also take out, not use the utility rooms here so that we could count the atrium space. Otherwise, it would have to stay a courtyard. So our initial scheme, of course, was to retain as much of the historic fabric as we could, to attain its original appearance. We were also limited in terms of roof height. We couldn't exceed the existing roof height of the building. But we still managed to squeeze an attic into that space. You can see through this section, we took underground all the way down to -3 meters, so we had to do a lot of serious waterproofing along the base of the building so that we could put in the sports hall and changing rooms underground and use more space above. In order to achieve this, especially since those old walls had been worked on so many times, they were not in very good shape, so we had to come in and do shore up the entire foundation all the way around the perimeter. And our construction engineer, Kastis Ablachinskas, devised a very elaborate metal truss roof system that essentially combined the old walls with the new walls, held them together into one, with the new walls, the concrete walls, sort of acting as the anchor, to that roof. And in this way, we could eliminate lateral forces that would potentially destroy the walls over time. And because of the nature of the building, the open spaces, submerging the sports hall, we had to do a very thorough investigation on fire safety. Initially they were not very keen on the idea of an underground sports hall. They typically don't like that. But we'd already done a similar project with a sports hall with American International School. So working with Irina Demidova, we came up with all these 3D diagrams showing that all the students could be safely evacuated, within the required time. One of the, then of course we did, thorough tvarkiba on the building, combining Kastis' construction research along with Dana, who did the architectural research, in terms of tvarkiba, and restoring the facades, waterproofing the base, trying to protect those walls as much as possible. Oops. Another issue that came up during construction, was light. We have this now is going to be classrooms, and there are very strict regulations on the amount of light that you have to have natural light into these classrooms. So as a result, we had all these historic openings that had been bricked over during the time of the fabric, when it was made into a factory. So we opened them all back up again, and in some cases combined 2 openings into one so that we could get as much natural light into all the classrooms at all levels as we could. And construction, demolition first began. Demolition had to be very carefully done because the building was not only very fragile, but there were people living above in the segments, or in this, it was a 4-story building in the corner. So there was, residents above that. We didn't want that to fall in. so there was a lot of effort done to stabilize the building, in the process of demolition as well. You can start to see the village that emerged from the dig with all the stone pavings, all the old wood foundation walls, lots of animal skulls, so there was some kind of farm element taking place underneath here as well. It was all thoroughly documented by the archaeological who worked on this, and submitted to Quadis, Cultural Heritage Department. And so we have this completely thorough investigation. Once the archaeology done, which spread out through the entire summer into the fall, was about an 8-month process. It was very exhaustive and very painstaking. We could finally begin to bring the building up from the ground. And because the building is very three-dimensional, there's multiple levels, not only just in terms of stories, but split levels as well. It was quite complicated, trying to get it all coordinated and make sure that all the pieces fit together properly. And as you can see, problems began to arise. One of the questions was the atrium roof. The contractor didn't like the design that we initially proposed, so we went through multiple variations to come up with a roof that everybody was comfortable with, was shed the water. One of the interesting requirements within the Cultural Heritage Department is that the skylight has to be lowered. You have to create the illusion that the courtyard is still there, at least from an aerial view. So of course, when you sink the skylight into the roof, you basically create a pool. So this has to be drained, especially in winter with snow loads. So, here we had to not only have proper drains all the way around, we had to heat them, to make sure that snow didn't stay on top of that roof during the winter time. Fortunately, after 3 years, the roof is still not leaking, so it was a successful situation. And now we get to the interiors. We tried, as you can see, especially when we had a situation like in that stair hall where you literally see all the layers of constructions. You see about 6 different layers of brickwork going on here. It wasn't like you had any perfectly preserved wall from the 18th century or from the 19th century. All these walls had been worked on repeatedly, patched over, windows filled in, etc. We even find an old fireplace that existed in one, so we kept that fireplace. As much as we could, we tried to expose the brick, to give it a sense of warmth, especially in contrast to all the cool colors that, were resulting. And in the atrium, to help deal with sound issues, we used these perforated wood, simulated wood panels, because we couldn't use wood panels for fire safety regulations. But the idea was to try to soften that sound in that space as much as possible so it wouldn't become a reverberation chamber. And as you can see, we worked closely with Echophone on a lot of the, throughout the ceiling, especially in the sports hall, with their different types of paneling. And it worked very well. One of the interesting discoveries we found while we were working on this project was we started to strip away the parging along Watako Street, is that we had all this polychromy. We were kind of wondering why there was those gaps in the windows. We thought maybe there had been windows there themselves, but we found out there had been no windows. Instead, they were painted windows to fill the holes in between. So Elena Kozlowskaite was a polychromist on the project, so she researched, we found it all together, and Rasa Kaiti did the actual physical work of restoring those windows on those facades. And also was a nice feature, as you can see, maybe you can see, maybe not, along here is a really nice sort of brick red band that went all the way around the building. And also, as you can see from these pictures here, we also found that there were some coins, artificial coins, to kind of anchor the ends of the building. So we tried to bring as much of that back to life to tell the story of the building, because we felt it was important, not just in terms of the city, so that people can see that, but also for the students. The students need to know what kind of building they are in, that is part of history, that is part of the cultural heritage of Lithuania, and Vilnius in particular. Where we went new, we went completely new. We wanted to make that contrast. We wanted to show that this sports hall and this art studio is a new structure. It's not an old structure. But obviously it was important that it was sympathetic fit with the historic materials. So working with materials company, we came up with these clay baguettes and used the same terracotta color as you see on the roof and you see all throughout the old town, because we felt that would work nicely. And what's really nice is you get multiple effects depending on what angle you're looking at that facade. We kept the rhythm of the openings, in terms of a bit of historicism there, but for the most part it was a very modern addition. And you can see, so the building has multiple faces. You know, it has a corner, as you look at Rusu and Latako streets, you can see what it would have looked like in the 19th and early 20th century. And as you turn around the building, you see what it's become now in the late 20th and 21st century. So this is quite a change. You know, a lot of people were really worried when we tore down that curved wall. They thought because it was curved, it might have been like a Baroque element. But no, it was built during the Soviet times. It just simply follows a curve of Mironov Street, you know, a very narrow wall. So we didn't see any value in the wall. We wanted to open it up, because that would be the main entrance for the students to come into the school. So it was more important for us to have that area open. And thank you very much. This is our group that worked on our project. As you can see, it was quite a group. And the photograph by Algimantas Kunchis that everybody knows is so familiar with, when you could walk by the old factory and get the smell of the cookies that were being made inside, and little kids would stop and try to, you know, convince the people inside to give them some. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time.